Some betrayals don't come with a warning shot. They linger in the air, the way your wife's perfume clings to an unfamiliar shirt, or the way laughter echoes from a locked phone at midnight. My name is Rylan Ventor, and tonight, my marriage ends with the quiet click of a door and the scent of someone else's cologne. I'm a process engineer at a manufacturing plant in suburban Texas, the kind of guy who believes in systems, procedures, and logical outcomes. My father taught me that marriage was sacred, a commitment you honor even when it gets difficult. He and my mother were married 43 years before she passed, and I watched him hold her hand through chemotherapy, through sleepless nights, through everything that life threw at them. That's what I thought marriage looked like. The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday. I was making coffee in our kitchen, watching the sun filter through the blinds of our 3-bedroom house on Maple Street. Selah was upstairs getting ready for work, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors in that familiar rhythm I'd grown to love over our 8 months of marriage. "Rylan, have you seen my laptop charger?" she called down the stairs. "Check the living room," I replied, stirring cream into my mug. "You were working on the couch last night." She appeared in the kitchen moments later, dressed in her navy business suit, the one that made her look professional and untouchable. Selah worked in marketing for a mid-sized firm downtown, always talking about campaigns and client presentations. She was beautiful in that polished way that made other men turn their heads when we walked into restaurants together. "Found it," she said, grabbing her coffee mug and checking her phone simultaneously. Always multitasking, always busy, always somewhere else, even when she was standing right next to me. "What time will you be home tonight?" I asked, the same question I'd been asking for weeks, always hoping for a different answer. "Late. We have the Morrison account presentation tomorrow, and the team needs to rehearse." She didn't look up from her phone as she spoke, her thumbs moving rapidly across the screen. I nodded, swallowing the disappointment that had become as routine as my morning coffee. "I'll grab takeout for dinner then." "Perfect." She kissed my cheek quickly, a gesture that felt more like checking an item off a to-do list than affection. "Love you." "Love you too," I said to her retreating figure, but she was already out the door, her heels clicking down the front walkway to her car. I stood in the kitchen for a long moment after she left, listening to the silence settle around me like dust. This wasn't how I'd imagined marriage would feel. When we were dating, Selah had been different, attentive, engaged, present. She'd laugh at my jokes, ask about my work, curl up next to me on the couch to watch movies. Now, 8 months after our wedding, I felt like I was living with a polite stranger who happened to share my last name. The first real crack in my carefully constructed reality appeared 3 weeks later. I was working late at the plant, troubleshooting a problem with the cooling system when I realized I'd left my laptop at home. I needed the specifications for the new pumps we were installing, so I drove back to get it. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway. Selah's car wasn't there, which wasn't unusual. She'd been working late most nights recently. I let myself in through the front door and headed to my home office, a small room off the living room where I kept my technical manuals and engineering software. My laptop wasn't on the desk where I usually left it. I checked the kitchen counter, the coffee table, even the bedroom, growing increasingly frustrated. Finally, I found it on Selah's side of the bed, plugged into her charger. She must have borrowed it when hers stopped working properly last week. I unplugged the laptop and was about to leave when I noticed her tablet lying open beside it, the screen still glowing. Without thinking, I glanced at it and froze. The messaging app was open, showing a conversation between Selah and someone named Derek. The last message, sent just 20 minutes ago, made my stomach drop. "Can't wait to see you tonight. Same place as last week?" Selah's response. "Already on my way. Missed you so much." I stared at the screen, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. There had to be an explanation. Derek could be a coworker, a client, a friend. The messages could be about work, about a group meeting, about anything other than what they appeared to be. But as I scrolled up through their conversation history, the explanations crumbled away like sand. Messages about missing each other, about stolen moments, about how good it felt to be together, photos that made my chest tighten with a pain I'd never experienced before. I set the tablet down with shaking hands and sat on the edge of our bed, trying to breathe normally. This couldn't be happening. Not to us, not to me. I was the guy who did everything right, who worked hard, who came home every night, who remembered anniversaries and birthdays and all the little things that were supposed to matter. The rational part of my mind, the engineer's brain that solved problems for a living, kicked into gear. I needed more information. I needed to be sure before I did anything that couldn't be undone. Over the next week, I paid attention in ways I'd never had to before. I noticed that Selah's late nights at work always fell on the same days. I noticed that she'd started taking her phone into the bathroom when she showered. I noticed that she'd been buying new lingerie, pieces I'd never seen her wear. The confirmation came when I checked our credit card statements online. Charges at restaurants I'd never been to, on nights when she'd told me she was working late. Hotel charges in our own city, always on weekday afternoons when she claimed to be in client meetings. I printed out the statements and spread them across my desk at work, cross-referencing dates with her explanations, building a timeline like I would for any engineering project. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. That night, I confronted her. "We need to talk," I said when she came home at nearly 11 o'clock, claiming she'd been at the office. She looked tired, her makeup slightly smudged, her hair not quite as perfect as it had been that morning. "Can it wait? I'm exhausted." "No, it can't wait." I gestured to the couch. "Sit down, Selah." Something in my tone must have warned her because her expression changed, became guarded. She perched on the edge of the couch cushion like she was ready to flee. "I know about Derek," I said simply. The color drained from her face, but she didn't deny it. That, more than anything else, told me everything I needed to know. "How long?" I asked. "Rylan, I can explain." "How long, Selah?" She looked down at her hands, twisted her wedding ring around her finger. 3 months. 3 months. A quarter of our entire marriage. I felt something fundamental shift inside me, like a foundation settling into new, unstable ground. "Why?" The word came out rougher than I intended. "It's not about you," she said quickly. "It's about me, about what I need right now. Marriage is harder than I thought it would be. I felt trapped, suffocated. Derek makes me feel free again." "So you decided to have an affair instead of talking to me about it." "It wasn't supposed to happen. We met at a conference, started talking, and things just developed naturally. I tried to stop it, but you didn't?" "No." She finally looked up at me, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Not guilt, exactly, more like defiance. "I didn't stop it because I don't want to stop it. I love you, Rylan, but I love him too. I need both of you in my life." The casual way she said it, like she was discussing menu options at a restaurant, hit me harder than screaming or tears would have. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a mistake she regretted. This was a choice she'd made deliberately and intended to continue making. "That's not how marriage works, Selah." "Says who? Why can't we make our own rules? Lots of couples have open marriages. We could figure out an arrangement that works for everyone." I stood up, needing distance from her, from the words coming out of her mouth. "An arrangement. You want to turn our marriage into an arrangement. I want to be honest about what I need instead of sneaking around. Isn't that better?" "What you should have done was be honest before you started sneaking around. What you should have done was talk to me before you decided to destroy our marriage." "I'm not destroying anything. I'm trying to save it." The conversation continued for another hour, going in circles, with Selah alternating between justifications and apologies, and me trying to understand how the woman I'd married had become someone I didn't recognize. Finally, exhausted and emotionally drained, I went to sleep in the guest room. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove to see a lawyer. James Morrison, no relation to Selah's client, was a divorce attorney recommended by a colleague who'd gone through his own messy split 2 years earlier. His office was in a strip mall between a tax preparation service and a nail salon, not exactly the prestigious setting I'd expected, but his reviews online were solid. "Tell me what's going on," Morrison said after I'd explained the basic situation. I laid out everything I'd discovered, showed him the credit card statements, explained about the messages I'd seen on Selah's tablet. He listened without interruption, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and studied me for a moment. "How long have you been married?" 8 months. "Any kids?" "No." "Joint assets, house, cars, significant savings?" "The house is in both our names. We both have cars with loans. About $30,000 in savings, most of it from wedding gifts and money we'd saved for a down payment before we got married." Morrison nodded, scribbling more notes. "Here's what you need to understand about Texas divorce law. We're a no-fault state, which means the court doesn't care why your marriage is ending. Adultery might factor into property division, but it won't prevent your wife from getting her share of marital assets." "What does that mean, exactly?" "It means that even though she cheated, she's still entitled to half of everything you've acquired during the marriage. The house, the savings, even portions of retirement accounts if you've contributed to them since the wedding." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "So she can betray our marriage and still walk away with half of everything?" "That's how the law works. Now there are some factors that might work in your favor. If you can prove she's been spending marital funds on her affair, those restaurant charges, hotel rooms, you might be able to argue for a larger share of the remaining assets. But we're not talking about a huge difference." "What about the house?" You'll probably have to sell it and split the proceeds, unless one of you can afford to buy out the other's share. I sat in silence for a moment, processing this information. The house on Maple Street that I'd thought of as our home, our future, reduced to a financial transaction. What are my options? I asked finally. Morrison set down his pen and looked at me directly. Option 1, file for divorce, go through the process, divide everything up, and move on with your life. It'll take several months, cost you probably $10,000 to $15,000 in legal fees, and you'll end up with roughly half of what you have now. And option 2? Try to work it out. Go to counseling, see if you can rebuild the marriage, avoid the financial and emotional cost of divorce. She wants to keep seeing him. She thinks we should have an open marriage. Morrison grimaced. I've seen that before. It rarely works out well for anyone involved. But legally speaking, if you can tolerate the situation, you'd avoid the immediate financial hit of divorce. Tolerate my wife having an affair. I'm not recommending it. I'm just laying out your options. I left Morrison's office feeling worse than when I'd arrived. The legal system, it seemed, was designed to punish the betrayed spouse as much as the betrayer. Selah could continue her affair, and I could either accept it or pay a massive financial and emotional price to escape it. That evening, I sat in my car in our driveway for 20 minutes before going inside, trying to figure out how to proceed. The house looked the same as it had that morning. Neat lawn, painted shutters, the kind of suburban normalcy I'd always wanted. But now it felt like a facade, a pretty exterior hiding something rotten underneath. Selah was in the kitchen when I walked in, cooking dinner like nothing had changed. How was work? She asked without looking up from the stove. I didn't go to work. I went to see a lawyer. She stopped stirring whatever was in the pan and turned to face me. Rylan, please don't do this. We can work through it. Your idea of working through it is me accepting that you're going to keep seeing Derek. Just until I figure things out. I need time to understand what I want. You're married to me, Selah. That should tell you what you want. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. We stared at each other across the kitchen, and I realized this was the moment when everything would be decided. I could fight for a marriage that might already be over, or I could accept defeat and try to salvage whatever I could from the wreckage. But there was a third option, one that Morrison hadn't mentioned and Selah hadn't considered. I didn't have to choose between accepting her affair and filing for divorce immediately. I could take control of the situation in my own way. Fine, I said finally. You want time to figure things out? Take all the time you need. Relief flooded her face. Really, you mean it? I mean it, but there are going to be some changes around here. What kind of changes? You'll find out. That night, I moved my clothes and personal items into the guest room. When Selah asked why, I told her that if she needed space to figure out what she wanted, I was going to give her all the space she could handle. Over the next week, I began implementing my plan. It started small. I stopped doing her laundry, stopped picking up her dry cleaning, stopped cooking meals for two. When she asked about it, I explained that I was adjusting to our new arrangement. What arrangement? She asked. I thought we were working on things. We are. You're working on figuring out what you want, and I'm working on adjusting my expectations accordingly. I opened a separate bank account and had my paycheck deposited there instead of our joint account. I calculated exactly half of our monthly expenses, mortgage, utilities, groceries, insurance, and transferred that amount to our joint account each month. Nothing more. Why are you doing this? Selah demanded when she realized what I'd done. You said you wanted to make your own rules. These are mine. This isn't what I meant. Then maybe you should have been more specific about what you did mean. The beauty of my approach was its simplicity. I wasn't violating any laws or doing anything that could be used against me in divorce proceedings. I was simply treating our marriage like the business arrangement Selah had turned it into. Within 2 weeks, the effects became obvious. Selah had to start doing her own laundry, buying her own groceries, managing her own schedule without my help. The seamless domestic support system she'd taken for granted disappeared overnight. More importantly, her affair became more expensive. When she wanted to meet Derek for dinner, she had to pay for it herself. When she wanted to book hotel rooms, they came out of her personal budget. The romantic gestures that had seemed so appealing when someone else was subsidizing them became financial burdens. This is ridiculous, she said one evening, confronting me in the living room where I was reading a technical manual. We're married. We're supposed to be a team. Teams don't usually have members working against each other, I replied without looking up from my book. I'm not working against you. You're having an affair, Selah. If that's not working against me, what is? That's different. That's personal. Marriage is personal. That's the whole point. She stormed out of the room, and I heard her on the phone a few minutes later, probably calling Derek to complain about her unreasonable husband. Let her complain. Let Derek hear about the reality of being involved with a married woman whose husband wasn't going to make it easy. 3 weeks into my new approach, I made a discovery that changed everything. I was cleaning out our home office, boxing up old files and documents, when I found Selah's external hard drive mixed in with my computer equipment. I almost set it aside without looking at it, but something made me pause. Call it intuition, call it paranoia, call it the methodical nature of an engineer who checks everything twice. I plugged the drive into my laptop. Most of the files were work-related: presentations, client documents, marketing materials. But there was one folder that stood out, labeled with a date from 6 months ago. The date of Selah's bachelorette party. I opened the folder and found video files, lots of them. The first few were exactly what I'd expected. Selah and her friends at a restaurant, laughing and taking pictures, the kind of innocent celebration you'd expect from a bachelorette party. But as I scrolled through the files, the content became increasingly problematic. The later videos had been filmed at a private venue, some kind of exclusive club I didn't recognize. The lighting was professional, the camera work too steady to be casual phone footage, and the content was definitely not the kind of thing that should have been recorded, let alone stored on a hard drive in our home office. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen, trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't just about Selah having an affair anymore. This was about illegal recording, potential distribution, and a whole host of legal issues that made our marital problems seem simple by comparison. I spent the next hour going through every file on the drive, documenting what I found, cross-referencing dates and locations. The methodical part of my brain took over, treating this like any other engineering problem that needed to be solved step by step. By the time I was finished, I had a clear picture of what had happened. The bachelorette party had been held at a venue that required signed agreements from all participants. Agreements that specifically prohibited recording. The videos on Selah's drive violated those agreements and potentially several state laws regarding consent and distribution. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what I found when I checked the file properties and metadata. These videos hadn't just been recorded and stored, they'd been uploaded, shared, distributed through Selah's work email account to multiple recipients. My wife hadn't just participated in illegal recording, she'd distributed the evidence through company systems, creating a trail that led directly back to her workplace, her colleagues, and potentially her clients. I copied everything to a secure drive, documented the metadata, and began researching the legal implications of what I'd discovered. By morning, I had a plan. Unlike my previous approach of passive resistance, this required active measures. I couldn't just sit back and let Selah figure out what she wanted anymore. The situation had escalated beyond personal betrayal into criminal liability, and that changed everything. I called Morrison first thing Monday morning. "I need to see you immediately," I told his secretary. "It's urgent." "Mr. Ventor, is this about your divorce case?" "It's about my wife's criminal case." Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Morrison's office felt different the second time I visited. The same strip mall, the same cheap furniture, but now it felt like a war room instead of a place where people came to divide up their broken dreams. "Show me what you found," Morrison said after I'd explained the basics over the phone. I handed him the secure drive and watched his expression change as he reviewed the files. He was quiet for a long time, occasionally making notes, occasionally shaking his head. "This is bad," he said finally. "Really bad." "How bad?" "Illegal recording in a private venue, violation of consent agreements, distribution through company email systems. Your wife could be looking at multiple felony charges." "What's our next step?" Morrison looked at me carefully. "Our next step? Rylan, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. What do you want to accomplish here?" "I want justice." "Justice for what? The affair or the illegal recording?" "Both. Those are two different things with two different legal remedies. The affair is a civil matter between you and your wife. The recording situation is a criminal matter between your wife and the state of Texas." I leaned forward in my chair. "Explain the difference." "If you pursue the criminal angle, you're opening a can of worms that you can't control. Once we turn this over to law enforcement, it's out of our hands. Your wife could face jail time, heavy fines, a permanent criminal record. Her career would be over. Your divorce would become the least of her problems." "And if I don't pursue it?" "You continue with the divorce proceedings as planned. You might get a slightly better settlement because of the affair, but nothing dramatic. Selah walks away with her career intact, her freedom intact, and half of your assets. I thought about the past month, about Selah's casual dismissal of our marriage vows, about her assumption that she could have everything she wanted without consequences. What would the criminal process look like? Morrison pulled out a fresh legal pad. First, we'd need to establish chain of custody for the evidence. That means documenting exactly how you found it, when you found it, and how it's been handled since then. Then we'd contact the appropriate law enforcement agency, probably the state attorney general's office, since this crosses multiple jurisdictions. How long would that take? The investigation? Could be months, but the arrest would probably happen within days of filing the complaint. These kinds of cases move fast because of the digital evidence trail. And Selah wouldn't know it was coming? Not unless you tell her. The first she'd hear about it would be when law enforcement shows up with a warrant. I sat back in my chair, weighing my options. The rational part of my mind knew that pursuing criminal charges was nuclear option, something that would destroy Selah's life completely. But the part of me that had been betrayed and humiliated wanted exactly that kind of decisive action. I need to think about it, I said finally. Take your time, but Rylan, once you pull this trigger, there's no going back. Make sure you're prepared for all the consequences. I left Morrison's office with the secure drive in my pocket and a decision to make. But first, I needed more information. That evening, I did something I'd never done before in our marriage. I went through Selah's personal belongings systematically and thoroughly. Her laptop, her phone records, her email accounts, everything I could access without breaking any laws myself. What I found painted a picture that was even worse than I'd imagined. The affair with Derek wasn't her first. There had been others, starting just 3 months after our wedding. The Bachelorette party videos weren't an isolated incident. There were other recordings, other violations, a pattern of behavior that stretched back to before we were even married. But the most damaging discovery was in her work email. Selah hadn't just distributed the Bachelorette party videos to random people, she'd shared them with clients, colleagues, even her supervisor, as part of what she called relationship building. She'd turned illegal recordings into networking tools. I printed out everything I found, organized it chronologically, and built a case file that would have made any prosecutor proud. By the time I was finished, I had enough evidence to end Selah's career, her freedom, and any chance she had of walking away from our marriage unscathed. The next morning, I called Morrison and scheduled another appointment. I've made my decision, I told him when I arrived at his office. I want to pursue criminal charges. Are you sure? Once we start this process? I'm sure. Morrison nodded slowly. All right, let's do this properly. The next 3 days were a blur of legal procedures and documentation. Morrison connected me with a criminal attorney who specialized in digital crimes. We spent hours going through the evidence, establishing chain of custody, preparing the complaint that would trigger the investigation. The criminal attorney, a woman named Patricia Chen, was impressed by the thoroughness of my documentation. You've done most of our work for us, she said, reviewing the files. This is one of the clearest cases of illegal recording and distribution I've seen. How strong is the case? Very strong. The metadata alone proves distribution through company systems. The venue contracts establish that recording was prohibited. The consent violations are documented and witnessed. Your wife's employer will probably fire her before the criminal case even goes to trial. When will the arrest happen? We'll file the complaint tomorrow. Law enforcement will probably execute the warrant within 48 hours. I went home that night knowing that I'd set something in motion that couldn't be stopped. Selah was in the living room when I arrived, watching television like nothing had changed. How was your day? She asked without looking away from the screen. Productive, I replied. Good. Derek and I are going to dinner tomorrow night, so don't wait up. I won't. She finally turned to look at me. Are you okay? You seem different lately. I'm fine, just adjusting to our new normal. I know this is hard for you, but I think we're handling it well. Maybe in a few months, when everyone's more comfortable with the arrangement, we could all have dinner together. You might actually like Derek. I stared at her, amazed by her complete disconnect from reality. She genuinely believed that I was going to accept her affair as a permanent part of our marriage, that we were all going to be one big, happy, unconventional family. Maybe, I said. The warrant was executed at 10:30 a.m. on a Thursday. I was at work when it happened, but I heard about it within an hour. Selah's company was small enough that news traveled fast, and I'd made sure that certain people knew to call me when something interesting occurred. According to my source, a friend who worked in the same building as Selah's company, law enforcement officers had arrived during the weekly staff meeting. They'd asked for Selah specifically, presented their warrant, and escorted her out of the building while her colleagues watched in stunned silence. Her computer, her phone, her personal belongings, everything had been seized as evidence. The IT department had been instructed to preserve all email records and server logs related to her account. By noon, the story was spreading through the local business community. By evening, it was on the local news. I was home when Selah called. "Rylan, I need you to come get me. I'm at the police station." "What happened?" "They arrested me. Something about illegal recording and distribution. I don't understand what's going on." "Have you called a lawyer?" "I can't afford a lawyer. They seized my computer, my phone, everything. I need you to help me." I sat in my kitchen, listening to my wife beg for help with legal problems that I'd created, and felt absolutely nothing. "I'll see what I can do," I said. "Thank you. I knew I could count on you." I hung up the phone and went back to reading my engineering manual. Selah spent the night in jail. She was released the next morning on her own recognizance, but the damage was done. Her employer had terminated her effective immediately. Her professional reputation was destroyed. Her legal problems were just beginning. She came home Friday afternoon looking like she'd aged 5 years in 2 days. "They fired me," she said, standing in our living room like she didn't know where she belonged anymore. "I heard." "Everyone saw it happen. Everyone knows. My career is over." "Probably." She looked at me with confusion and growing suspicion. "You don't seem surprised." "Should I be? You've been making risky choices for months. Eventually, consequences were going to catch up with you." "This isn't about my personal life. This is about some stupid recording from my bachelorette party." "Is it stupid? Because from what I understand, you distributed that recording through your work email to multiple people without their consent." Her face went pale. "How do you know that?" "Because I'm the one who turned you in." The silence that followed was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. Selah stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time, her mouth opening and closing without any words coming out. "You what?" "I found the files on your hard drive. I documented the distribution trail. I turned everything over to law enforcement." "You destroyed my life." "No, Selah. You destroyed your life. I just made sure there were consequences for it." She collapsed onto the couch, her hands shaking. "Why? Why would you do this to me?" "Because you betrayed our marriage and assumed I would just accept it. Because you turned our home into a staging area for your affairs. Because you committed crimes and thought you were above the law." "The recording thing was a mistake. I didn't know it was illegal." "But you knew distributing it through company email was wrong. You knew sharing it with clients and colleagues was inappropriate. You did it anyway because you thought you could get away with it. I need a lawyer. I need help." "Yes, you do, but you won't be getting it from me." "We're married. You're supposed to support me." "We're married. You were supposed to be faithful to me." She started crying then, the kind of desperate tears that come when someone finally realizes the magnitude of their situation. But I felt no sympathy, no urge to comfort her, no desire to fix what she'd broken. "What happens now?" she asked through her tears. "Now you face the consequences of your choices. You find your own lawyer, you deal with your own legal problems, and you figure out your own future." "What about us? What about our marriage?" "What marriage? You ended our marriage when you decided Derek was more important than your wedding vows." "I made mistakes, but we can work through this." "No, we can't. Because this isn't just about mistakes anymore. This is about who you really are, and who you really are isn't someone I want to be married to." That weekend, I moved all of Selah's belongings into the guest room. Not out of the house, I wasn't legally allowed to do that, but out of the master bedroom, out of the shared spaces, out of my daily life. She spent most of Saturday on the phone, trying to find a lawyer who would take her case. The few who were willing to meet with her all said the same thing. The evidence was overwhelming, the case was strong, and her best option was probably a plea bargain. Sunday evening, Derek came to the house. I answered the door and found him standing on my front porch, looking uncomfortable and uncertain. "I'm here to see Selah," he said. "She's not available." "Her phone's been disconnected. I've been trying to reach her since Friday." "Her phone was seized as evidence in her criminal case." He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "Look, I heard about what happened. This whole thing has gotten way out of hand." "Has it?" "I never wanted her to get in trouble. I didn't know about any recordings or legal issues." "But you knew she was married." "That's between you and her." "No, it's between all of us. You made it between all of us when you decided to pursue a relationship with my wife." "I think maybe I should go." "I think you should." He turned to leave, then stopped and looked back at me. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry about how this all worked out." "No, you're not. You're sorry you got caught up in something messy. There's a difference." After he left, I found Selah in the kitchen, having obviously overheard the entire conversation. "He's not coming back, is he?" she asked. "Would you, in his position?" "This is all your fault. If you hadn't turned me in, none of this would have happened. If you hadn't committed crimes, none of this would have happened. I loved him. You loved the excitement of sneaking around. You loved having someone tell you that you were special and different and deserved more than ordinary life, but you didn't love him enough to leave me for him, and he didn't love you enough to ask you to. She had no answer for that, because we both knew it was true. The next week brought a parade of legal consultations, court appearances, and media attention that Selah was completely unprepared to handle. Her case had become a cautionary tale about digital privacy and workplace misconduct, covered by local news outlets and legal blogs. I watched it all from a distance, like observing a natural disaster that had nothing to do with me. Selah would leave the house in the morning for meetings with lawyers and return in the afternoon looking more defeated than before. My attorney says I should consider a plea bargain, she told me one evening. What kind of plea bargain? Probation, community service, fines, but I'd have to admit guilt, and it would go on my permanent record. What's the alternative? Go to trial and risk jail time if I lose. What are you going to do? I don't know. I don't know anything anymore. For the first time since this all began, I felt a flicker of something that might have been pity, but it passed quickly, replaced by the memory of her casual dismissal of our marriage, her assumption that I would accept whatever arrangement suited her needs. You'll figure it out, I said. Will you testify against me if this goes to trial? If I'm subpoenaed, yes. Even though it will destroy any chance we have of saving our marriage? Our marriage was destroyed the moment you decided that your vows were optional. Everything that's happened since then has just been cleaning up the wreckage. 2 weeks later, Selah accepted the plea bargain. She pled guilty to illegal recording and distribution, received 2 years probation, 200 hours of community service, and $15,000 in fines. Her professional license was suspended, her security clearance was revoked, her career in marketing was effectively over. The day after her sentencing, I filed for divorce. Morrison's office had become as familiar to me as my own workplace. I'd spent more time there over the past 2 months than I had in my own living room, planning legal strategies and documenting the collapse of my marriage. The criminal conviction changes everything about your divorce case, Morrison explained as we reviewed the paperwork. Adultery combined with criminal behavior gives us significant leverage in property division. What does that mean in practical terms? It means you're likely to get more than half of the marital assets. The house, most of the savings, probably her car too, since she can't afford the payments anymore. And what does Selah get? Her legal debts, her probation requirements, and whatever's left after we settle the property division, which isn't much. I should have felt victorious, but mostly I felt tired. The past 3 months had been a marathon of legal procedures, court appearances, and emotional exhaustion. I wanted it to be over. How long will the divorce take? With her criminal conviction, probably not long. Her attorney knows she doesn't have much leverage. I expect they'll want to settle quickly and avoid a lengthy court battle. Good. Morrison leaned back in his chair and studied me. Can I ask you something, Rylan? Are you satisfied with how this has all played out? What do you mean? I mean, when you first came to see me, you were angry about your wife's affair. Now you've destroyed her career, her reputation, her financial security, and her freedom. That's a pretty comprehensive revenge. I thought about his question for a moment. It wasn't about revenge. It was about consequences. What's the difference? Revenge is about making someone pay for hurting you. Consequences are about making sure actions have appropriate results. Selah made choices to have affairs, to commit crimes, to assume she could manipulate everyone around her to get what she wanted. I just made sure those choices had the results they deserved. And you're comfortable with that? I'm comfortable with the fact that actions have consequences. I'm comfortable with the fact that marriage vows mean something. I'm comfortable with the fact that some behaviors are unacceptable, regardless of how someone tries to justify them. Morrison nodded slowly. Fair enough. The divorce proceedings moved quickly, just as Morrison had predicted. Selah's attorney was a court-appointed lawyer who was handling the case pro bono since she couldn't afford private representation anymore. He was competent but overworked, and he clearly wanted to settle the case as quickly as possible. We met in a conference room at Morrison's office on a Tuesday afternoon in late spring. Selah looked different than she had 3 months earlier. Thinner, older, wearing clothes that had seen better days. Her court-appointed attorney, a young man named David Park, had a stack of papers and a resigned expression. My client is prepared to accept the proposed settlement, Park said without preamble. Morrison slid a document across the table. Mr. Ventor gets the house, the primary savings account, and his personal vehicle. Mrs. Ventor gets her personal vehicle, assuming she can maintain the payments, and the smaller savings account, All debts incurred after the separation, including legal fees, remain with the party who incurred them. What about alimony? Park asked. Given the circumstances of the marriage's dissolution, Mr. Ventor is not obligated to provide spousal support. Selah spoke for the first time since we'd sat down. I can't afford my car payments without income. That's not Mr. Ventor's responsibility, Morrison replied. You'll need to make arrangements with the lender or surrender the vehicle. Where am I supposed to live? Again, that's not Mr. Ventor's concern. You'll need to find alternative housing arrangements. I watched Selah absorb the reality of her situation. She would be leaving our marriage with essentially nothing, no income, no assets, no support system, and a criminal record that would make finding new employment nearly impossible. This isn't fair, she said quietly. Fair? Morrison looked up from his papers. Mrs. Ventor, you committed adultery, violated your marriage vows, and engaged in criminal behavior that resulted in a felony conviction. What exactly do you think would be fair under these circumstances? I made mistakes, but I don't deserve to be left with nothing. You're not being left with nothing. You're receiving exactly what your choices have earned you. Park leaned over and whispered something to Selah. She shook her head, whispered something back, then looked directly at me for the first time since we'd entered the room. Rylan, please. We were married for less than a year. Can't we find some way to work this out that doesn't leave me destitute? I met her gaze and felt nothing but exhaustion. You had multiple opportunities to work things out, Selah. You chose not to take them. I was confused. I made bad decisions. But I never wanted to hurt you. You never wanted to face consequences for hurting me. There's a difference. I'm begging you. Show some mercy. Mercy? I leaned forward slightly. Where was mercy when you were having affairs? Where was mercy when you were spending our money on hotel rooms with other men? Where was mercy when you told me I should accept your adultery as part of our marriage? That was different. No, it wasn't. You made choices based on what you wanted without considering how those choices would affect anyone else. Now you're facing the results of those choices, and you want mercy. But mercy is something you earn through remorse and changed behavior, not something you demand when consequences catch up with you. Selah started crying, the same desperate tears I'd seen before. But this time, they had no effect on me whatsoever. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I'm so sorry for everything. I know you are. You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry you're facing consequences. You're sorry your life didn't work out the way you planned, but you're not sorry for betraying our marriage. Because if you were truly sorry for that, you would have stopped when I confronted you instead of asking me to accept it. Park cleared his throat. Mrs. Ventor, I strongly advise you to accept this settlement. If we go to trial, you're likely to receive even less favorable terms. Selah wiped her eyes and looked at the papers in front of her. What choice do I have? None, Morrison said matter-of-factly. You have no choice because you eliminated your choices through your actions. She signed the papers with shaking hands. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks later. I didn't attend the final hearing. Morrison handled it alone and called me afterward to confirm that everything was official. It's done, he said. You're divorced. The house transfer will be completed within 30 days. What about Selah? She moved out yesterday, left a forwarding address with the court for any remaining legal matters. I hung up the phone and walked through the house on Maple Street, seeing it clearly for the first time in months. It was mine now, completely and legally mine, but it felt hollow, like a stage set after the play has ended and the actors have gone home. That evening, I got a call from an unknown number. Rylan, it's Derek. I almost hung up, but curiosity stopped me. What do you want? I wanted to apologize. For everything. I know it's too late, but I needed to say it. Okay, you've said it. I also wanted you to know that I tried to help Selah after everything fell apart. I offered to let her stay with me temporarily, help her get back on her feet. And? She said no. She said she didn't want charity from someone who abandoned her when things got difficult. Did you abandon her? There was a long pause. Yeah, I guess I did. When I realized how serious her legal problems were, when I saw that being with her was going to complicate my life, I backed away. I'm not proud of that. At least you're honest about it. She really loved you, you know. Even during our affair, she talked about you constantly. How smart you were, how dependable, how much she respected you. She had a funny way of showing respect. I think she convinced herself that she could have both relationships without hurting either one. She genuinely believed she could make it work. What she believed doesn't matter. What she did matters. I know. I just thought you should know that she didn't set out to destroy your marriage. Derek, can I ask you something? Sure. If Selah had left me for you, if she'd gotten divorced and been free to marry you, would you have wanted that? Another long pause. Honestly, no. I liked the excitement of the affair, but I never wanted the responsibility of a real relationship with her. I'm not proud of that either, but it's the truth. Then you both got exactly what you deserved. Yeah, I guess we did. After Derek hung up, I sat in my empty house and tried to figure out what I was supposed to feel. Victory, relief, satisfaction, regret. What I felt was tired. The next morning, I started the process of rebuilding my life. I updated my address with the bank, the insurance company, all the institutions that needed to know I was now a single man living alone. I cleaned out closets and drawers, removing the last traces of Selah's presence from the house. I found a box of wedding photos in the bedroom closet and spent an hour looking through them. Selah in her white dress, radiant and hopeful. Me in my tuxedo, believing we were starting a life together that would last forever. Friends and family celebrating with us, toasting our future happiness. It felt like looking at pictures of strangers. I threw the photos away. 2 months after the divorce was finalized, I ran into Selah at the grocery store. She was in the checkout line ahead of me, buying generic brands and counting out exact change for her purchases. She'd lost more weight and was wearing clothes that looked like they came from a thrift store. She saw me as she was leaving and stopped. "Hello, Rylan." "Selah, how are you?" "I'm fine. How are you managing?" "Day by day, I'm living with my sister in Austin, looking for work. It's difficult with my record, but I'm hoping to find something eventually." "I hope you do." "I'm in counseling now, trying to understand why I made the choices I made, how I can avoid making similar mistakes in the future." "That's good. I know you probably don't want to hear this, but I need to say it anyway. I'm truly sorry for what I did to our marriage. Not sorry because of the consequences, but sorry because I betrayed someone who deserved better." I looked at her carefully, trying to determine if this was genuine remorse or another manipulation attempt. What I saw was a woman who had been fundamentally changed by experiencing real consequences for the first time in her life. "I believe you," I said finally. "Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me?" "I already have forgiven you, Selah. Not for your sake, but for mine. Carrying anger and resentment was poisoning my ability to move forward." "Thank you. But forgiving you doesn't mean I would ever trust you again, and it doesn't mean I regret any of the decisions I made. You needed to face consequences for your actions, and I needed to protect myself from further harm." "I understand. I hope you find whatever you're looking for in Austin. I hope you build a better life for yourself." "I'm trying. That's all any of us can do." I watched her walk away across the parking lot, getting into an old car that had seen better days. For a moment, I felt something that might have been sadness for what we'd lost. But it passed quickly, replaced by relief that I was no longer responsible for her choices or their consequences. That night, I sat in my living room and thought about the past year. 12 months earlier, I'd been a married man who believed in happily ever after. Now I was divorced, living alone, and starting over at an age when I'd expected to be settled and secure. But I wasn't bitter. I wasn't broken. I wasn't even particularly sad. I was free. Free from the anxiety of wondering where my wife was and who she was with. Free from the humiliation of pretending not to notice obvious lies. Free from the financial burden of subsidizing someone else's betrayal. Free from the emotional exhaustion of trying to save a marriage that only one person was committed to preserving. The house on Maple Street was quiet, but it was my quiet. The decisions about how to spend my time, my money, my energy were mine alone to make. The future, uncertain as it was, belonged to me. I opened my laptop and began researching vacation destinations. I had accumulated weeks of unused leave at work, and for the first time in years, I had no one to consult about how to spend it. 6 months later, I met Jennifer. She was a nurse at the clinic where I went for my annual physical, recently divorced herself, with 2 kids and a realistic perspective on relationships. We started talking about our respective divorces, comparing war stories, laughing about the absurdities of family court and legal proceedings. My ex-husband thought he could have his affair and keep his family too, she told me over coffee after our 3rd date. He was shocked when I filed for divorce, genuinely shocked, like he couldn't understand why I wouldn't just accept the situation. "What did you do?" "I took him for everything I could legally take. The house, the kids, half his retirement, alimony for 5 years. He calls me vindictive, but I call it consequences. Consequences are important. They're the only thing that teaches some people that their actions matter." I knew then that I'd found someone who understood what I'd been through, someone who wouldn't judge me for the choices I'd made or expect me to feel guilty about protecting myself from further harm. We took things slowly, both of us wary of making the same mistakes twice, But gradually, carefully, we built something new together. Not the naive romanticism of first marriage, but something more solid, more realistic, more honest. Jennifer's kids accepted me eventually, and I found that I enjoyed being a stepfather more than I'd expected. We blended our families, our finances, our futures, with the kind of deliberate care that comes from having learned hard lessons about trust and commitment. 2 years after my divorce from Selah was finalized, Jennifer and I got married in a small ceremony with just our immediate families present. No big reception, no expensive honeymoon, no grand gestures or romantic speeches about eternal love. Just two people who had survived the wreckage of failed marriages and decided to build something better together, one honest day at a time. The house on Maple Street became our family home. Jennifer's kids got their own rooms, and we created new traditions, new memories, new reasons to believe in the possibility of happiness. Sometimes late at night, I would think about Selah and wonder how her life had turned out. But those thoughts came less frequently as time passed, and when they did come, they carried no emotional weight. She was part of my past, a chapter that had ended, a lesson learned and applied. I never saw her again after that encounter at the grocery store, and I never tried to find out what became of her. Some stories end with dramatic confrontations and final words. Others simply fade away, becoming footnotes in the larger narrative of a life lived forward rather than backward. My story with Selah ended not with forgiveness or reconciliation or mutual understanding, but with acceptance of what had happened and determination to build something better from what remained. The center had not held, but sometimes, when the center cannot hold, you discover that you're stronger than you thought, more resilient than you imagined, and more capable of starting over than you ever believed possible. And sometimes that's enough.